In this lesson, we'll learn how it is that we see the colors we do, as well as some basic terminology for describing the colors that we observe. All right, before we get started, I'd just like to let you know that Digital Tutors would like to say thank you to iStock Photo and the artist G. Brunden for their images that were used in this series of lessons. You can access these same images and thousands of others by accessing your exclusive Digital Tutors iStock discount at the following site. Okay, so I've got the Lesson 2 Begin file open here. If you want to go ahead and follow along with me, feel free. So color is one of the most important things that really any artist can work to gain a strong grasp of. It is all around us. It's in the world everywhere we look, and really it's become something that we look at and we don't even think about oftentimes. So one of the things that we need to understand, not necessarily from a scientific standpoint, but just from a really core basic standpoint, is why is it that we see the colors that we see? So I've got this little example for you here. Let me just go ahead and bring that in. Now, this is a very crude example, and it is not going extremely deep into the science of this, but what you should understand is that color only exists because of light. Where there's no light, there's no color. So the reason that we see the colors that we do is because light waves strike an object, in this case this red car, and they are reflected back into our eye. Now, some of the light waves are absorbed by the object and some of them are reflected back. So in this case, the red waves, what we perceive as red, is reflected back into our eye because this is a red car, and we can all see that here in front of us. So that's a pretty simple concept, right? All right, great. So now, one of the probably really complex, or I won't say complex, but just tougher things to grasp when it comes to color is just all the different terminology that exists, from chroma to hue to saturation to intensity, all these different terms. And I want to kind of simplify these terms for you next. So if you've watched Kurt's foundational art course, you heard him refer to really the fact that there's three properties to color. There's hue, intensity, and value. So what I want to show you here is that really there's three buckets or three categories that you need to be concerned with when trying to identify a color. So probably the easiest to grasp and the most obvious is just the name of that color. That's one of the ways that we identify a color. So you can see here on the left I've got some examples. We've got red, green, blue, but those are really basic. Color naming even extends into things like crimson, chartreuse, turquoise, colors like that. Colors that one person may call one name and another person may call another name entirely. So we can't just describe a color based on the name as an artist because there is a room for a lot of confusion in that regard. So now there are two other buckets here that I want to talk about. One is purity and the other is value. So now each one of these buckets has a number of different terms that are really kind of fit into each one of those categories. So let's go ahead and talk about purity first. The first thing you see here is chroma. So when it comes to chroma, what that means is it means how pure a hue is in relation to the color gray. So you can see here that for chroma, I've got sort of this red color here. Let me just zoom in on that. And you can see here, we've got on the far left, we've got pure gray, and on the far right, we've got this pure red color. And these steps in between are kind of just decreasing in the level of chroma, all the way down to this pure gray. So chroma refers to purity of a hue in relation to gray. So saturation is the next thing that I have here. And this is a term that often arises for digital artists. So saturation just simply means the degree of purity of a hue. So you can see here over at the left this sort of this hot pink color, very very bright, very vivid. It is very saturated. So moving to the right here, we're slowly removing some of that saturation out of the color until we arrive sort of at this really light pink color. So pulling that saturation out. Now, the last term in the purity bucket here that I want to talk to you about is intensity. Intensity is the brightness or dullness of a hue. So one can either lower the intensity by either adding black or white to a hue. So in this case, you can see I've got this bright orange color here in the center, very intense. But as we move either to the left or to the right of this center color, we're starting to become less intense. And on the left side, we are adding black to the hue, stepping down all the way to pure black. Then on the right side, we're adding white to the hue. Both white and black can have the effect of making a color less intense, just simply by adding in increments of those two colors. So now that is purity. Purity is that second bucket for describing the colors we see. Now the last one we're going to talk about here is value, and value is probably a term you've heard before. It simply is light and darkness of a hue. But there's a few terms that really fall into this bucket, and that you should be able to identify in terms of, well, that's referring to value. So the first one is luminance, and luminance is simply a measure of the amount of light reflected from a hue. So again, going back to the way we see color, or the reason we see color, is because of light. And looking here at kind of the examples that I have, these ones on the left have a lower percentage of white in the color than these ones on the right. It should be fairly obvious to see that. So basically, these ones with a higher amount of white in the hue indicates a higher luminance or value. So over here on the left, it'd be a lower luminance or a lower value. So now the next two terms here we're actually going to talk about in a little bit more detail here in an upcoming lesson, but the next two terms are shade and tint. And again, we're thinking in terms of value, the lightness and darkness of a hue. A shade simply means we are mixing black into a hue to decrease the value of it. And a tint simply means that we are lightening the value of a hue by mixing in white. So now this is a lot of different terminology, but these are all fairly common terms in the world of color. And I really wanted you to just kind of understand these terms and begin to be able to identify color based on these different properties. So now when I went through color theory way back when I was in school, we had to sit down and paint color swatches with actual paint and identify them based on these properties. So now obviously our method of delivery for this course is very different than what I went through, but I still think there is value in that exercise. So if you have this project file open, go ahead and bring in your layers panel and open up this exercise layer here. So what I've got here is in the center, I've got 2 rows of just simply color swatches. And there's a bunch of different colors here of all different kinds, or basically hues. But what I want you to do is first come through and take this this row right here and look at these colors purely based on the purity of the color. And I want you to just simply use your move tool here and click on one of these and drag it up into one of these 3 buckets here. So in terms of purity, is it highly pure? Is it a very pure color? Is it a very low color in terms of purity? Is the purity very low? Is the chroma low? Is the saturation low? Or is the intensity very low? So, and then I've got a 3rd bucket here in the center where if it's sort of halfway between, go ahead and drag it up into there. Let me show you a couple examples. So if I wanted to go ahead and grab maybe this green color here, it looks like a very, very intense color. Let's go ahead and click on that, and I want to drag it up here into the high bucket. Now, I know that, let's say this color right here, this sort of gray blue, that's very low saturation, closer to gray than it is a very vibrant blue. So I'm going to say that's not a very pure color. That's going to be up here in the low bucket. And then we could come in here and find one that's sort of halfway between and drag it up into the medium bucket here. So once you've gone through all of these colors right here and drug them into which bucket you feel they belong, let's come down here to the similar value portion of this this document, and we got the exact same colors, and now I want you to begin identifying these colors based on their value. So if it has a very dark value, it's very low value, say for example this one right here, we'll drag it over here. For very light value, let's go ahead and grab this one, and we'll drag it right over here. And again, for colors that are sort of average in terms of value, go ahead and drag them into the medium bucket here. So let's see, maybe this one right here looks like a fairly average value. So again, the purpose of this exercise is to get you sort of programmed to look at colors in terms of their purity and their value. So once you've gone through this little exercise, if you want to check your answers, go ahead and feel free to open up the Lesson 2 end file that you'll also find in your project files. So with that said, in this lesson, we've not only learned how it is that we see the colors that we see, but we've also learned about methods for describing those colors.